see, go live. Okay, we're live on most platforms. Okay, we'll go ahead and go with this. So, welcome back, everybody. You are listening to BCB, Business Casual Basketball. This is your host, Aaron Washington, coming back at you guys. We're simplifying the game a dollar at a time. You know how we do things at Business Casual. Glad to have you all back on for another recording, another episode. This is 139. We're going to be diving into the Drew Holiday extension to start things off. And then later on, we're going to be discussing the Utah Jazz and their magical season. They're coming off a loss last night in overtime to the Phoenix Suns. But regardless, they're doing incredible things in the Western Conference. I wanted to take a look at how they're progressing and see if that might give them a better shot this year to get over that proverbial hump in the playoffs. To join me on the podcast here today is staff writer for Brew Hoop over at SB Nation. Guys, this is Andrew Goodman. This is his third year of covering this team, Milwaukee, for SB Nation. And I was telling him right before we jumped on, this is perfect timing because that's right when Milwaukee started their ascension. They got Budenholzer in there to kind of take reins off of Jason Kidd. And ever since, it's been a magical rise. 60-win seasons, back-to-back MVP awards for Giannis and the such. And now Drew Holiday is in the fold to kind of give them an extra layer of interest, intrigue, and strength going into the stretch of the season into another postseason. So, Andrew, thanks for your time, man. Glad to have you on. Excited to talk Drew Holiday, among other things. And, just have a fun conversation this evening.
Thank you. Very well said on your part. And again, I just want to thank you for having me on to your show. Really appreciate it.
Sure thing, man. Glad to have you. Before we get the formal content started, I just wanted to shout out a few of our sponsors we have here for the Unwrapped Sports Network as a whole. So we have some apparel available at teespring.com/stores/unwrapped. So if you want to cop a t-shirt that I have available for my podcast, as well as some other podcasters at our network, they have some things that you can purchase over there. So if you want to check out that link down at the bottom, that's going to allow you to check out some of our apparel and other accessories we have for sale if you guys want to support our podcast. Also, for Unwrapped Sports, we have a VIP program that's available at patreon.com/unwrappedsports. So that's going to give you some exclusive features, including us at the network, those of us that have podcasts. So if you want to further support our cause, we greatly appreciate that over at patreon.com. Also at mybookie.ag, we have a code USN100 at the bottom of the screen that you guys can use to give you a 100% sign-up bonus. So this is the stretch of the regular season for NBA. Baseball's in full swing, and sports are always going at 100 miles an hour here in the world here. So if you guys want to get your deposit doubled and get in on the action, be sure to use that code at the ticker at the bottom there to get started. And then lastly, we have rxhemp.com. We have a code rxhemp-USN. That's going to be 10% off your entire order. So if you guys want to use the recovery cream as well as some other products that will really help you get rejuvenated for your physical activity, be sure to check them out. They have a lot of great products over there that are really going to make your life easier if you are active in the sports world. So Andrew, this is our time here to discuss the Milwaukee Bucks, discuss Drew Holiday. I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts on this. Holiday is kind of that third string, that third prong of the big time players in Milwaukee, and that's really going to help them take a step forward to get over the playoff disappointments that have hit them in the past couple of years here. He signed a 4-year, $160 million max deal. So that's 120% raise on his current 25% million base for this season. So quite a nice raise for him. The bonuses I've heard are going to carry over into his next deal. So it's going to be about $4 million in bonuses, likely bonuses going forward for him. I think that's each season. And he could have signed for more money, like almost $170 million if he had waited until free agency with another team, or he could have signed for $228 for 5 years with the Bucks. So I think all things considered, this is a nice middle ground. It gets him locked in now before he hits free agency. He still gets a nice sum of money. And then he also gets a player option for that last year. So Andrew, just wanted to hear your thoughts initially on this deal. Were the Bucks kind of all invested in this? Did they have to get this deal done now, considering what they gave up to get him in the first place in New Orleans?
Yeah, when you talk about the Drew Holiday extension here, when you look at what Milwaukee gave up in the offseason to get him, just a bevy of draft picks and draft capital and all that, it's kind of a no-brainer here that if you do sign him to a long-term deal to keep him in Milwaukee for a few years, this trade is a win regardless. And obviously, if he leaves Milwaukee in the offseason, then it's a head scratcher, and the Bucks gave away all that draft capital just for 1 year of Drew Holiday. But here, when you look at what Drew Holiday has done, not only on the court in his first season in a Bucks uniform, but what he and his family do off the court. This just shows the commitment that not only Drew has to the Bucks, but what the Bucks franchise has in Drew. And I think when you're looking at this extension, you might think, oh, wow, that's a lot of money for a guy who, if you just look at his stats, like, well, it might be a little questionable. But for me, it's all about the fit. And Drew Holiday's fit in Milwaukee is, the way he has helped change, the culture and how Milwaukee plays on both ends of the floor. This was just a no-brainer extension. And we know Drew Holiday did miss some time earlier in the season due to a positive COVID test. And, that time he was out, just how poorly Milwaukee played defensively, it just showed how important Drew is to this team. And, the Bucks didn't really struggle offensively without him. That's because, they have number 34 and their offense isn't going to struggle when he's on the floor. But they just missed having Drew, the leader, their anchor defensively, someone who could switch 1 through 5 defensively very successfully. Just, having this commitment from Drew, he is in his 30s, but, he's a guy that just doesn't show like he's slowing down. And I think this is some of the best basketball he has played in his entire career.
You really said it. And I wanted to go through some numbers. You're mentioning that he's playing the best basketball of his career. It may be kind of hard to believe at first, but we have to consider that he's not carrying as big of a load as he did in New Orleans. When you have primary ball handlers like Chris Middleton and Giannis in the fold, he doesn't have to be as part of as many actions. And his usage, therefore, has gone down from years past. So he's down from last season being at about 26, 27% usage to this season down at about 22%. So that definitely correlates with less touches. He's not finishing as many plays, but he's still very much involved in this team. And then, of course, as you mentioned, his impact goes beyond the offensive side of the ball. He's a key stopper for the primary offensive threats that the Milwaukee faces on a daily basis. And then you're looking at some other percentages like his 2-point percentage and 3-point percentage. Those are career highs. He's shooting the ball better than he has before. That's a credit to the gravity that Giannis and Chris Middleton demand on the court at any given time. And his assist percentage is up as well. So, that is really a testament to the fact that not only is he more efficient, but he has always been a selfless player. He's willing to get other people involved. And a career high of his percentage, a career high of his shots specifically are assisted this year. So that's up at about 43%. So other guys are making plays for him, and then he reciprocates that by making plays for others. So definitely a great guy to have on this team. And, when you put that into perspective, it makes you understand a little bit more as to why Milwaukee gave him this much money. Because you mentioned this as well, Andrew, the per game stats are not going to tell that story. He's at about 17 points per game this season, 4 rebounds, 5 assists. Those are good, but they don't scream like almost max deal numbers. But you have to dig in deeper, and then that's where the value of Drew Holiday starts to shine.
Right. And like you said, the efficiency this season has just been off the charts. And I think one of the most important aspects aside, we're talking just offensively. We all, Drew is an elite defender in the NBA. But since he came to Milwaukee, Mike Budenholzer, had him playing in the dunker spot, which is basically operating on the baseline. This has opened up so many looks for, Middleton and 3-point shooters, DiVincenzo off a catch and shoot. So just having Drew Holiday, adding that new wrinkle to the offense, absolutely no disrespect to Eric Bledsoe and his tenure in Milwaukee. He was a solid regular season for the Bucks, but we all knew what the case was come postseason time. Eric Bledsoe would fold. It was just very easy to get him out of a rhythm. But now you have a proven playoff stud in Drew Holiday. Granted, if he can stay on the floor, we know about his documented past with injuries, but just how much gravity he demands offensively, because he's a great finisher around the rim. He's very strong. I think his strength is very underrated. Great 3-point shooter, catch and shoot off the dribble. I also think his step back is one of the most lethal step backs in the game. It's just super subtle. He just lulls the defender to sleep, and it's like he just makes these little steps and he creates so much space on the perimeter. But yeah, like I said, this dunker spot on the baseline, his vision is off the charts. We see it every game. He's making these one-handed whip passes to the corner on top of the arc to, Brook Lopez or Middleton, and, just creates so much open opportunities. And, the Bucks are just loaded with 3-point shooters with the addition of Bryn Forbes as well. And, Bobby Portis is having a great season, shooting the ball overall and from deep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he's really underrated when you're talking about his passing. Like, nobody really talks about that. We talk about his ability to use his frame to get inside, his efficiency improvements, and then of course his defense. So that's a great point on his playmaking. And, the film and the stats really back that up. When both sides of the coin really come together to show what he can do, as far as being like a secondary playmaker for this team, it's really incredible. And I went to cleaning the glass earlier to look at his breakdown by position. And this season, he's actually playing more point guard than in years past. So I mean, he's still a combo guard, but they were saying that 2/3 of his minutes come at the one as opposed to the two. So you would think that he would be involved in more actions, but it's a little bit deceiving because technically he's the one. But as you know, Andrew, like Giannis does bring the ball down a good bit. He does begin some of these actions because he's a very gifted ball handler and passer for his size. And then, of course, Chris Middleton does that as well. So it's kind of like by committee as far as like who handles the ball. But the great thing about him, and especially like Chris Middleton, is like they're so diverse and adaptable when it comes to what they do on offense. So they can both be off ball, they can both be on ball, they can both spot up, they can both create their own shot inside and out. It's really just incredible like how the pieces fit together. And I think that's what's going to give them that added layer of security when it comes time for the postseason. So teams like Miami or Toronto in the past won't be able to easily shut them down, because if you're forming a wall against Giannis, that's going to leave you vulnerable in other places. And I'm sure that was something else we talked about before we went on the air was Mike Budenholzer and the coaching staff's willingness to try out new things in this regular season. So they might be sacrificing a few regular season wins. Like they're not at the 1 seed. They're probably not going to finish number 1 in the conference, but they would gladly give that up to perform better in the postseason. And I think that's going to show itself when we're talking about how people like Giannis finishes games. I think you're going to see Giannis operate more as like a pick and roll player in that dunker spot. And you mentioned earlier, plays like that give Holiday and then Middleton the chance to close games for them. And it should allow them to be a lot more efficient because they're going to be harder to stop because you can't just go under screens on them and force guys like them to shoot because they'll kill you all day.
Right, exactly. You really hit the nail on the head. And, you have Drew Holiday. He's not a guy you can leave open. So just having the addition of Drew Holiday, it's like you said, it's almost going to be, it's not impossible, but to form a wall against the Bucks, you're going to have to pick your poison. So you're either going to have Middleton open on the perimeter. Brook Lopez is also having a nice year, a rebound year, shooting the basketball from deep. So that's the blessing of adding Drew Holiday, is just how many new wrinkles the Bucks have experimented with. And I'm going to give credit to the coaching staff and Mike Budenholzer. We saw the Milwaukee Bucks the last 2 seasons just absolutely run through the regular season. And, they look like the team to beat. But then come playoff time, it's just they lose the same way over and over again. Just they had that drop coverage, which was just leaving opposing shooters open, basically getting whatever they wanted. But now you have Drew Holiday, someone who can switch, sort of Eric Name, who covers the Milwaukee Bucks for The Athletic, had a great piece earlier this season. And he basically, I'm paraphrasing here, basically said that Drew Holiday, was very vocal about, advocating for the Milwaukee Bucks to start switching defensively. And now when you also add the acquisition of PJ Tucker, granted, I know PJ Tucker's probably having the worst year of his career. He is also up there in age, but adding a guy like PJ Tucker, you can now stagger him with Brook Lopez. As we know, Brook Lopez might be one of the slowest players in the NBA. And if you can't really switch effectively with a guy like Brook Lopez on the floor, just because, he is slow. His rim protection is still very good, but just having a guy like PJ Tucker off the bench just to stagger, 15 to 20 minutes with Brook Lopez just, opens up so many defensive possibilities for the Bucks. And when you look at Milwaukee's closing lineup here, they usually go with a combination of like Drew Holiday, DiVincenzo, Middleton, Connaughton, and Giannis. So you're going to be looking at that, and you might be able to replace Connaughton with PJ Tucker. Granted, PJ Tucker's hurt at the moment with the calf strain. It's
right.
Unclear when he's going to return. Mike Budenholzer says he's getting closer. How coaches are with injuries. So his return is, who knows? Your guess is as good as mine. But just having a guy like Drew Holiday being vocal about switching, and it's just opened up so many possibilities for the Bucks. And like you said, totally fine with the Bucks dropping these games in the regular season if they are experimenting. They're trying new things, and if you're losing trying new things, fine in my book. Instead of losing just the same way over and over, just the redundancy.
Exactly. And as far as it goes in the standings, they're about 6 games ahead of the next closest team, which is Atlanta as of this recording. So it's not like they're going to lose any ground in the standings if they lose a few more games. The cushion, the safety net is already there, so they can afford to drop a little bit, slip a little bit. As long as they're top 3, which they are pretty much guaranteed at this point, then they're going to be all good for the postseason. Andrew, we've been talking about Drew Holiday's offense, and we know about his defense, but one key number or stat that I found on Cleaning the Glass as well that really just goes to demonstrate the effect of his defense, not just this season, but for his whole career. So if we're going back through the last 10 years of his career, we're looking at how teams perform on the court versus when he's off the court defensively. Teams allow, except for if we exclude the first 2 seasons of his career, all the other years of his career, teams perform better with him on the court defensively. So that's really just a testament to what he brings to a team as far as his toughness, his versatility, just his IQ on that end. And it comes out to about minus 3.7 points allowed per 100 possessions. So I think that's this year's numbers, but it's a negative number for every season except for his rookie and sophomore year. So just really incredible as far as what Jrue Holiday does for a team defensively. And I wish I had the numbers of how they performed defensively when he was out compared to when he was in, but suffice to say, I'm sure it was much worse. And you touched on that earlier. And that's part of the reason why they went through some of their losing streaks. And all in all, it has been an up and down season for Milwaukee, but it's generally been positive because we keep talking about what Holiday brings to this team. And I think they're gelling at just the right time now, even though they've had winning streaks and losing streaks. It's all going to come together, I think, at the right time. They just want to make sure they're healthy, like PJ Tucker is back and they're gelling when it comes time for the playoffs. But if we turn our attention to where the money has been invested on this team, that's worth a discussion as well, because this lineup isn't cheap. It's definitely it's going to be something that weighs down on their books for several years. And if you add in Holiday's deal for next season, even if they renounce all cap holds besides those 3 guys, except for the guys that are already guaranteed, then they have $130 million committed in salary next season. The luxury tax is 136. So they're already pushing up against the tax just for guys that are guaranteed. So I think that you add in these 3 guys, as far, add in some of those younger players that are still on the rookie contracts. I mean, they're already up against the tax. So that's going to force them to make some difficult decisions. Like Portis and Forbes, I believe, have player options for their next season. PJ Tucker is going to be a free agent. So it calls into question some of the moves they're going to try to make around the margins. I think John Hollinger at The Athletic addressed this in his last article, where it's like a cap geekery section. And he really addressed this as to what Milwaukee's going to have to do in the future as far as their books go. So definitely something to keep an eye on. And then another tidbit that I found is that they're trying to duck the luxury tax this season because the repeater penalty is a real thing, and it's going to come into play once we get into the next few years of this deal. So any thoughts on their financial commitments to these guys? I know it's definitely necessary, and it's going to be worth it, especially if they win a championship, but I just want to acknowledge that because it is going to make them have to be a little more creative on how they build a supporting cast around those 3 core characters in the following years.
All I'm going to say is if you can't win a championship with Giannis in his prime, Middleton, and Jrue Holiday, probably not going to win a championship. And for me, for the Bucks to, shell out this money for players that are worth, totally fine with that. But like you said, Bryn Forbes and Bobby Portis are, just playing astronomically above what their contract is worth. So when you look at that, 2 key contributors who are going to probably command more money in the offseason if they do opt out of their contract, then you're going to be looking at, well, we're going to have to let 1 or 2 of these players go. But like you said, it'll be worth it if the Milwaukee Bucks do come back and win the title this season. Then, hey, if they do win the title, maybe Bobby Portis and both Bryn Forbes are, inclined to opt into their contract or, restructure the deal, take some sort of a pay cut. But, like I said, if, I don't mind having all this money, of course, tied up to Giannis, Middleton, and Jrue Holiday, proven elite basketball players in the NBA. And for me, many people feel differently about draft picks and draft capital. But for me, if you're a contending team and you have, transcendent player, Giannis Antetokounmpo, someone who, you don't find everywhere and is a once in a lifetime type player, you're going to have to be flexible with your money and you're going to have to be wise with it. And I think going out and getting guys like Portis and Bryn Forbes just, raises the ceiling of this Bucks team tremendously, because we've seen in years past, the Bucks were bringing Sterling Brown off the bench, who really isn't that great of a basketball player, plays hard, but, on a contending team, can he really be getting minutes? Kyle Korver was, a key contributor. Like, no disrespect to Kyle Korver, one of the best shooters in NBA history. Sure. But if you're having him being key contributor on a contending team, that's not going to happen.
Right. Yeah, good points all around, man. And it really just this is where the front office is really going to have to be a little more creative. This is where Houston really made its mark last few years of the Harden era there. Brooklyn's kind of walking this tightrope. Golden State, they're having to get creative because they're hitting luxury tax penalties, the repeater tax. So yeah, for Milwaukee, I mean, this season is going to be expensive, but it's not really this season where they're going to have to really make some decisions. It's the next coming years.
Right.
So DiVincenzo has another deal under his rookie contract for next season. And then, the extension talks for him are going to become a talking point. So we'll see if the Bucks decide to extend him prior to hitting free agency and then what goes on after that. And then Connaughton is also on the Bucks. That's kind of like a weird situation because I don't know if they really planned on signing Connaughton like that prior to the season. They planned on getting Bogdanovich and going another route, but I want to say they actually had to restructure Connaughton's deal. I'm not sure if you can shed any more light on that, but I think something tricky, a little bit, something weird happened at the beginning of the season. I can't remember how it happened, but if you remember, then
very, very odd situation. With how poorly Connaughton played last year, it was sort of like, Bucks fans were like, why are we bringing him back? But
yeah.
So in the offseason, they signed Pat Connaughton. They had to restructure his deal, and they ended up giving, it wouldn't be a John Horst deal if he didn't give his players a player option after year number 2. So John Horst is just notorious for giving guys player options. But I just want to go back to my point about the draft capital and all that. If you're a contending team, for me, like I said before, many people have different opinions on this. For me, if you have a guy like Giannis, first round picks aren't going to matter.
Right.
Because if you have Giannis, odds are you're going to be contending for a championship team. And for championship teams, do first round picks really carry much weight, specifically in the NBA? In my opinion, not really. But back to Connaughton. Yeah, that was a super weird situation, having to restructure his deal. I think he's making somewhere in the ballpark around $5 million per season. That sounds about right. He does have a player option after year 2, I believe. So that was what the restructuring was about. But, I don't really have many complaints about Pat Connaughton this season. He did start off, playing pretty poorly defensively. He has shot the ball consistently this season, but I do believe Pat Connaughton is a guy that has earned his role in crunch time. He's not playing in every fourth quarter. It depends on the matchup, who the Bucks are playing, what the game flow is. But I think Pat Connaughton has opened up a little bit more for the Bucks offensively. He's one of the more athletic guys in the NBA in terms of speed, and his vertical is insane.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, he can switch effectively. He's not a lockdown defender, but he's a guy that you have on the floor, you're going to be able to switch him. And I know you were talking about DiVincenzo's contract. He has one more year in his rookie season. That's another thing. The Bucks are obviously very high on DiVincenzo, but in my opinion, I don't really view DiVincenzo as a cornerstone guy. I think he can be a very solid contributor in the NBA, but for me, if I'm the Bucks GM, really not sure. Granted, there are role players who don't even play who are making crazy $15 million a year. So granted, I hope DiVincenzo has a great agent, but if I'm the Bucks, I'm really not comfortable, going over $12 million, and I'm not even sure they can really afford anything more than that. So if you're looking at a guy like DiVincenzo, for him, it's going to be like, okay, are you going to be chasing a ring, or are you going to be, chasing paper? Which, obviously I have no problem with a guy chasing paper. I think every player should do that.
Get the check, man. Get the check. That's what we're all setting out to do. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, I get that. And I mean, when it comes down to its extension, the team is definitely going to be hesitant. I'm sure they're going to have a number in mind that they don't want to exceed. They will have the benefit of those bird rights, of course. So they'll be able to re-sign him for whatever they feel comfortable with. But of course, that's going to have tax implications. So I'm sure they're going to be a little bit hesitant to give him anything crazy. But that's kind of where all this is going to fit in. Do they try to get somebody that's underrated, they feel, in their opinion, somebody that has lots to prove, that can come in and fill his spot, and ensuing free agency periods, trades, things like that? That's all going to be interesting to keep an eye on. And then you mentioned how first round picks are not important. That is completely true. They have barely any first round picks left for the next several years. They have some pick swaps in 24 and 26, nothing at 23 and 25 or 27. So the chips are in, man. This is the time for the team to really step up and make their mark. And I have high hopes for them. I think this year is going to be different for them. And the competition is as stiff as ever with those two teams ahead of them in the standings. But if they play their cards right and they can utilize Giannis properly, so he's not a non-factor like we saw last postseason, I think they have a great shot to break out of the East and make the finals. So definitely be a great story for a franchise in a small market like Milwaukee that hasn't seen such success as far as the championship goes in several decades. So I think the extension was a great move, and it's another step on their path to becoming a championship team.
Yeah. And really, all I know as a Bucks fan is pain. It's just pain, 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 pain. But now, you watch this Bucks team, which I believe is totally different than prior seasons. Last 2 years, like I said, just absolute regular season juggernaut. Just totally flop in the playoffs. But if you just look at how this team, like how close each guy is with one another, you can kind of tell that every man on this roster is bought in. Whenever they're in the game, they play hard. And Drew Holiday is a guy who plays a very integral role in all this. So very thankful that the Bucks actually went out and made the move for Drew Holiday. Granted, they were about to ship DiVincenzo to Sacramento for Bogdanovich, and really still not very clear to me what had happened. But I think when you're looking at the Bucks this season, I think they're kind of thankful with how things are playing out that that wasn't the case, that DiVincenzo ended up in Sacramento and he's still in the Bucks uniform.
Yeah, everything happens for a reason, man, and I think they're happy with how things are going, regardless of how that deal played out. So we'll keep an eye on Milwaukee and see how their season goes. But if we're talking about incredible seasons, we cannot leave off the Utah Jazz, man. I mean, they've been, incredible in the Western Conference. So they're having a season like we saw from Milwaukee the past 2 years, where they're at the top of the conference. They are destroying the competition. The numbers are insane. Their point differential is off the charts right now. And I went back and I looked at some numbers here for the Utah Jazz to try to put this in perspective. So after last night, they're at about 38-13 as far as the record goes. Phoenix is creeping up on them in the standings, but it's going to be definitely interesting to watch those two teams go back and forth for the number one spot. But for Utah this season, this is their best winning percentage, 74.5%. Since 97-98, which is that season. Of course, they went to the finals, lost to the Bulls. They had a 75% win percentage. So this is the best Jazz basketball in a long time. And I'm sure that, us as fans, just kind of spectators are not taking this. We're not going to take this for granted. I'm sure their fans are not. So some of the numbers that are making this possible is their 3-point percentage and attempts. So they're at about 43 threes a game, but they're also fourth in percentage at 39%. They're also first in rebounds, so I think they're going to credit Rudy Gobert for that as well. And they're also 30th in two-point attempts, so they just do not believe in two-pointers. They're all in on the threes. They hit a lot of their threes. So that puts them first in offensive rating as far as cleaning the glass goes, and then second. And then if we go back to the past 2 weeks, they're almost first in both of those categories. So just wanted to shed some light on their incredible season. And even though they lost last night, they're on a magical run. A lot of their players are having career years. Gobert, Donovan Mitchell, Jordan Clarkson, and they've all bought in, similar to Milwaukee's guys, that they believe in the system, they believe in each other, and it's really just contributing to an incredible season. So initial thoughts on the Jazz. I know this isn't the team you cover, but they're pretty incredible in the West. Anything stand out to you as far as Utah goes?
I'm just going to say that I'm very thankful that the Utah Jazz are in the Western Conference, because whenever they play the Milwaukee Bucks, they always they wreck them. Like you said, Quinn Snyder just has his finger on the pulse of that team. He's a great coach, NBA coach, and it's clear that, like the Bucks, that they all play for each other and everyone is bought in. And when you're talking about Utah's ascension this season, I think Donovan Mitchell's evolution as a playmaker has really opened up the doors for so many avenues offensively for the Jazz. Just some of these passes he's making are just incredible. He does sometimes struggle with, high volume. He'll score like 30 points, but he'll need 24 shots to do that. But I also think he's great at getting to the foul line, just creating contact. As we know, he's one of the more explosive finishers around the rim in the NBA. But for me, another big reason for their success is the emergence of Jordan Clarkson. As we know, Jordan Clarkson was arguably one of the worst players in basketball in the finals a few years ago in a Cleveland uniform.
Oh, yeah.
So just, to see him bounce back, he had a few tough seasons in a Laker uniform as well. I think just a culmination of Clarkson's offensive game, like how well he fits, and Donovan Mitchell's playmaking just, it's been great. As we know, Rudy Gobert is always going to be, stout defensively, and, good teams rebound. So it's not surprising that Utah is one of the best teams in the NBA, not only because they shoot the three point ball well, but they take care of business on the glass. And we see teams who get killed on the glass are usually the teams that don't do very well in the NBA.
Exactly. Those are great points. And focusing in on Donovan Mitchell specifically, you mentioned his playmaking improvements. That's definitely impressive. And what that tells me is that he's not having a career year as far as like points per game
Mm-hmm.
or anything like that. I mean, his assists per game are not even up by that much, but his percentages are up. So his 2-point percentage is down a little bit, but his 3-point percentage is up to about 40%. And what that tells me also is, going back to last season, that's not a fluke. So last season, he was at about 38%. So it's sustained. This is not a flash in the pan. This isn't something that's just going to happen and kind of dissipate. He's really taken pride in the fact that he can be an elite jump shooter from three, and then kind of keep the defense honest because, as you said, he's an incredible athlete. So if he gets into the lane, he has great footwork. So he utilizes his athleticism very well. Euro steps are pretty incredible from him. Off-foot layups. I mean, he's very creative around the rim. So that gives Utah this dimension that's really incredible. And while we're talking about that backcourt, we can't do this without giving credit to Mike Conley, who came in last season.
Absolutely.
And, he really struggled. He said it himself. He was shooting under 40% from the field and 36% from three last season in the first 5 months. He turned it on in the bubble and in the postseason. And now, this season, he's sixth in the league, or this is at the time of this article I read by 538 over there.
Mm-hmm.
But he was plus 4.7 as far as a net rating goes. So that is sixth in the league. We're talking about defense, and then offense is at about plus 3.1. So the advanced numbers shine very favorably upon him. He's back to being an incredible defensive player, especially for his size. His shooting is accurate. So he's found his place in this offense because he had to get used to having more ball handlers on the court, unlike the situation he had in Memphis. So now that he's adapted, now that the shooters are firing away, Joe Ingles, Bogdanovich, it makes him almost unstoppable at times. Only the most elite teams, kind of like we saw from Phoenix last night, really have a chance because you have to match up with them inside with Gobert, outside with Conley and Mitchell, around the margins with the wing players. So that's what makes them so formidable. So they've really invested in this core. They've bet on a lot of players to be better than we've seen before, and it's all paying off for them. So it's a convergence of a lot of factors, and we'll see if it sustains in the postseason. But if any of this is sustainable, they have a great shot at taking a run to the finals because they've been the best team in the league so far this season, and I don't really think that's debatable.
Right. And Mike Conley is a guy who's played in big games his whole career. We saw it back at Ohio State when he was paired up with Greg Oden. That Ohio State team was so much fun to watch.
Feels like
he's played
so long ago now.
Yeah, right. I know we're getting old.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's also, when he was in the Memphis Grizzlies, that grit grind Memphis Grizzlies team with Tony Allen and Marc Gasol. Mike Conley's been there. He's played in huge playoff games throughout his career. And I think that is going to help sort of get Utah over this hump because you have this playoff ready guy in Mike Conley. He's mentally tough. He's great locker room presence. He's been there. And also, have to give credit, like you said, Bogdanovich and Ingles are super reliable from three-point land. And I also think Joe Ingles is great as a playmaker. He and Gobert also run a really nice two-man game. But I also really enjoy Royce O'Neal's game. He's a guy who does not have to score to impact the game. And, he's regarded as one of the better perimeter defenders. So when you look at Utah's team, it's all coming together. We saw him struggle last year in the bubble. But, I believe COVID just really hampered a lot of teams. I don't really like using that as an excuse, but it's the reality. You can't go from playing elite basketball, taking 4 months off, and then expect to just pick up like it's nothing. So when you look at this Utah team, just super enjoyable to watch, and they just have so many likable guys on their team.
They really do. They all work seamlessly together, and the great thing about their team is they have so many different pieces that they can kind of call upon, and then it allows them to have kind of like a safety net. So if somebody's having an off night, odds are somebody else is there to pick up the slack. So if Donovan Mitchell is off, hey, Jordan Clarkson is a super sub. He can come in and pick up the slack. If Joe Ingles is having a tough time turning the ball over, hey, Matt Conley is there to right the ship. Bogdanovich can create shots out of nothing. He's really incredible. You touched on Royce O'Neal. I have a soft spot for him. I wrote a piece on him. I think it was last January, I want to say, when they were on this crazy win streak. I touched on his importance to the team and how he's underrated. I still think he's underrated because nobody really talks about him, but that's the beauty of a guy like Royce O'Neal. He doesn't command the ball. He doesn't command attention on the spotlight. He just makes things happen around the margins, just being a great player, getting boards, matching up with some of the better offensive players in the other team. And this is really an incredible season for Utah because they finally found that balance between offense and defense. I think previously their problem was, if we go back like 2 or 3 years ago, it was the offense wasn't there. If we go back to last season, they trended too far in the other direction. Their defense fell off. We didn't really see the traditional Utah defense. This season, they found a mix of both. So now they're literally one of the best teams on both ends, and that's really a special combination. And metrics like that view a team like that favorably. And if you go around the league, you look at these different prediction algorithms, they're all going to give Utah a really great chance to win the title. I'd say at least 15 to 20% based on their recent postseason appearances, the experience, the raw numbers, everything like that. They have a great shot. So Gobert specifically is a guy I wanted to talk about because he's been in the mix for Defensive Player of the Year every year, and this season might not be any different. So do you feel like he is back in the mix for Defensive Player of the Year? Does he have an edge over guys like Miles Turner? Bam has been mentioned. Ben Simmons. Would you put him back right there around the top spot? Like, I mean, with team numbers like this, I feel like it's almost impossible to leave him off any kind of Defensive Player of the Year list. He's just been incredible once again.
Yeah, no, great points you just made. And Rudy Gobert, I think you have to have him as, top 2 Defensive Player of the Year. You can honestly do that any season. I'd be totally okay with it. It's just the way, he commands so much attention in the paint. Teams don't even think twice. They think twice about taking the ball into the paint, and teams are discouraged from going into the paint because of Rudy Gobert. Mm-hmm. And something else about Utah, which makes them super dangerous, is they have one of the best home court advantages in the league. And I'm not sure if they're going to have full capacity during the postseason or what, their crowd numbers are going to look like. But number one, when you add in the altitude, we know, like we've seen so many years prior, just teams just go to Utah. They just go to die in Utah. I think Utah is one of the toughest, if not the toughest places to win. So when you put all these factors together, Gobert playing, elite defense like he always does, Royce O'Neal contributing defensively as well. He, locks down on the perimeter, doesn't score to contribute, doesn't need a score to contribute. And then you have guys taking care of business offensively. Jordan Clarkson coming off the bench, being our microwave scorer. Donovan Mitchell hitting almost 40% threes. Ingles, great corner 3-point shooter. I think this could be the year for Utah. And we know, like you mentioned, they did lose to Phoenix. Phoenix is having, Cinderella season, one of the more likable, teams when you look at, I like Chris Paul a lot. I know many NBA fans have different opinions about him, but, I just love seeing Phoenix, especially when, what Monty Williams has been through. But going back to Utah, I think this really is Utah's shot. This team is right there with one of the best teams they've had, for sure. And they've had a lot of really good NBA teams.
Oh, they have. And if we're talking about Utah this season, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't bring up past seasons for this team as well, because when we talk about franchises in the NBA and how good they've been over time, a lot of times we like to glorify teams that have had smaller runs. Like we talk about the Warriors' recent run, about 5-year run. We like to talk about the Bulls when they had that 6+ year run where they had, Jordan and they were winning championships. But we don't give enough credit to like the Indiana Pacers of the world, the Utah Jazz teams of the world. Do they have championships? Unfortunately not. But what they do have is longevity and they have consistency. So you go back in to look at, winning percentages over the past 20 years. You might find 3 losing seasons. Houston's another team. Again, hasn't won a championship in quite some time, since 95. But it's like they're almost never bad. Like they're at least good, if not great, every year. So you add that in, and it's like another layer of respect that we have to give to Utah. So credit to the front office. They don't take long to kind of rebuild this team.
Yep.
And they bounced back from the Gordon Hayward departure extremely well. So that's just insane, especially for a market that's not in LA, it's not in Miami, it's not in Chicago. They play their pieces extremely well.
And I'm going to go off on a little rant here. I think part of the problem with, social media today is all these, like ESPN House of Highlights, they only want to see LeBron, Anthony Davis, Victor Oladipo's now in Miami. So of course, social media is fawning over, Victor
Yeah.
Oladipo, who's, not even close to what he was, prior to that catastrophic injury he suffered with the Pacers a few years ago.
Right.
So that's my biggest issue with how basketball is covered today is you have these smaller markets who doesn't really matter how well they play. They're just always going to be swept under the rug. And, you can't call, I hate when, national writers and pundits, they say a team is underrated. Well, they're only underrated because you guys don't talk about them.
Mm. I think you're preaching, man. You're definitely
I don't
on
know if you feel the same way, but that's just how I feel being a fan of the Bucks. Like,
I totally
just
agree.
these small markets is always, are just an afterthought, no matter how well they play. They really have to win a championship in order to, be talked about, which I think is really what's wrong with, how the NBA is covered, as a whole.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up because that reminds me of something I saw just the other day. I saved this quote by Neil O'Shea, GM of the Portland Trail Blazers. I had this on my phone from 3 years ago, but he was talking about how we have to really enjoy the journey of these teams. Only one championship to go around every year, but there are plenty of teams that are very exciting,
Right.
very well coached. They work together extremely well. Sometimes when they don't win, it may just be a product of circumstance. It doesn't mean that maybe that team wasn't good enough or that team was lacking severely. It just wasn't meant to be for that team. But it's like, if we're not enjoying the process, we're not enjoying growth, we're not enjoying sustainability and things like that, then like what's really the point? What are we doing here as fans, as sports fans? So I think that quote rings more true now than ever because we're just not glorifying these teams like Utah enough for when they have seasons like this where it's like, will they win a championship? Maybe not. Maybe they lose to the Lakers or something, but it's still incredible what they've done this year and almost, for the last 20 or 30 years because they're almost never bad. They always find a way to be competitive. So, no, you're totally right on that point, man. I'm 100% in agreement, and that's just the way social media goes. The top names get first dibs, but hopefully that changes a little bit. And guys maybe like Donovan Mitchell at least or Gobert can get a little more shine because they deserve it,
No, absolutely. I agree with you 100%.
So one last thing to look at for Utah is like how they match up with the teams they're competing against for the sake of playoff matchups. So we have to look at the LA teams. We have to look at Phoenix, who they just played last night. We have to even look at maybe like a Portland as a team that could give them a little bit of trouble. The conference is very deep. So as good as they've been, it's just not going to be easy whatsoever when it comes to the postseason. So starting with the Lakers, if they're fully healthy, man, I don't know if they can really beat that team. When you have transcendent stars, there's not a whole lot you can do when it comes to defending them or continuing to play the way you do. And the Lakers are still one of the best defensive teams, even without those two guys. So I just wonder how they're going to operate. And I think Gobert might be an extreme disadvantage if they go small with Anthony Davis at the 5. How do you feel about that matchup?
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the biggest concern for Utah's, matchup against a Laker team. LeBron and AD are out. They're falling in the standings. So what if they do, somehow get that 8 seed from the playing game and match up with Utah? That's got to be like worst case scenario.
Be still disheartening, man.
Right. You have all the success, regular season success, one of the best, teams in, regular season franchise history. Oh, you're going to be matched up with a healthy AD and LeBron. But for me, biggest question, can AD stay healthy? AD is probably one of the most injury prone players in basketball. It just seems like every time he shoots, he falls to the ground. It's just not safe. So I think for me, it's not a question about, if LeBron's going to be healthy. LeBron was built in some laboratory. Okay. Like he's just different. For me, it's like AD, it's just anything that can go wrong with AD has gone wrong, which sucks because AD is one of the best players in the NBA, has, all the talent in the world, the length. But for me, when you're talking about teams that could give Utah some problems, is now I'm looking at the Denver Nuggets as serious contenders. I thought they were contenders, but now I think they're at like legit contenders when you look at how Aaron Gordon has played. Aaron Gordon's not a guy that's gonna propel you to a championship, but when you're looking at the fit and how well he has fit in alongside Nikola Jokic, it's all about fit. And this is, going back to Drew Holiday, this is why the Bucks shelled out all this money for Drew Holiday, is because it's just such a great fit. And you're seeing it, in the week that AG has been in Denver. I think when Aaron Gordon's on the floor, they have like a plus 61 plus minus, which was just absurd. Plus minus is not my favorite stat, but it definitely matches the eye test with how well, Denver's always been a great offensive team, but now you have a guy like Aaron Gordon, who's been playing really well defensively. I think that team is very dangerous now.
Haven't lost since they acquired him, 6-0, I believe at this time. So, gosh, like I didn't even mention him in that first sentence, and they definitely do deserve mentioning because they look extremely strong. So I mean, how about that for a rematch, for a bubble rematch, Denver and Utah? Like I'd pay a lot of money to see that again. So
I'm here for it.
I'm all here for it, man. The Clippers are also an interesting case if they go up against them in a playoff series. That would be very interesting because with Utah, it's like they have this elite defensive presence in the paint. Royce O'Neal's a great defensive player. How does that match up against the two wings in LA? Kawhi and Paul George have had their ups and downs, but in their last game where Paul was feeling good, Kawhi was his old self. I think they both had 20 plus points. Like that is a nightmare for any team to face. So they are a little bit more vulnerable. I believe their defense has been a little bit lacking this season, although their offense has been incredible. Extremely good jump shooting team. They could probably match up extremely well with Utah when it comes to like just shooting the ball.
Right.
But their defense is a little bit weaker than we've seen. But I mean, if they're fully healthy, they still have Patrick Beverley and those guys. And I think if they play Zubac, they're still a really good defensive lineup. So that's worth keeping an eye on too. I think just with the state of the Western Conference, the matches could be anything because the top 4 or 5 and 6 are shifting. So we could get this matchup in the first round. We could get the Lakers in the first round. There's just no telling at this point. So, I mean, either the LA matchups would be extremely exciting for a multitude of reasons.
When you talk about the Clippers, for me, it's like you have Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, which, you have two top 20 players. Paul George, obviously Kawhi Leonard is, top 10 player in the NBA. It's just odd that they have those two guys and the rest of their roster, in my opinion, it's just meh. It's just kind of like, okay, we got Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, so, we're chilling. I think they're also relying a lot on Rondo. We saw his postseason resilience with the Lakers last season in the bubble. But for me, I'm not so sure if I'm confident as a Clipper fan because we saw when Paul George was in Oklahoma City a few years ago in the playoffs, just got owned by Joe Ingles. I'm pretty sure Paul George still has nightmares of Joe Ingles.
I'm sure he does. Way off P, pandemic P, like whatever you want, however you want to describe it, wasn't good. And I think the names are going to follow him. Like I guarantee you, there's going to be at least one playoff game this coming postseason where he shoots 2 for 12 or like 5 for 18 or something. And you're going to see one of those names trending on Twitter. I guarantee.
Absolutely.
Something P. Yeah, just like insert name here P. Like something is going to be on there. Like I'm calling it right now. They're going to jump on his back and when he has a bad playoff game because it's just.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. But all I was going to say was, I'm not worried about Kawhi Leonard. We know Kawhi Leonard is one of the best two-way players in all of basketball. Just such an amazing talent. But for me, it's, is Paul George going to show up? Which version of Paul George are you going to get? Are you going to get the two-way stud or are you going to get the guy who's just, packs it in the playoffs and is just going to be shooting 5 for 15, 5 for 20 every game? So they're relying a lot on Paul George, and no knock on Paul George. He has a lot of talent. He's very, very great at this basketball game.
Oh yeah.
But what version of Paul George are they going to get in the playoffs?
In the playoffs, man. That's where he has to prove himself. That's all that matters at this point, no matter what he does in the regular season. But I think that about does it, man. That sums up our conversation. Looking forward to what both of these teams are going to offer in the postseason. But ultimately, like we said, it's about the journey as well as the end result. And then, in that theme here, it's been a fun ride and it's been a fun conversation. So, Andrew, I want to thank you again for joining me today. Before you head out, I wanted to give you an opportunity to plug anything you wanted to plug, where people can find you on Twitter, projects, things like that. Just have a go at it, man.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So you can find my work on Twitter at Andrew__NBA. I do recaps for Brew Hoop, so you can just find myself brewhoop.com. I don't recap their home games. I do recap most of their away games though, so you can find all my stuff on brewhoop.com. And just want to thank you again, Aaron, for having me on. Had a great time talking basketball with you.
Same here, same here. And listeners, I hope that goes for you as well. Hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to check out Business Casual's content, we are on social media, Instagram and Twitter at BC Basketball 2. And then if you want to check us out on our website, that's going to be bcbasketball.info. Some updates are going on up there. New blog post coming soon. 2021 free agent list will be live in just a few days. So thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. Enjoy this NBA season. Enjoy the rest of your day. And as usual, we'll be back next week with some more NBA analysis. So until then, take care, and we'll see you back on the pod real soon.